Welcome, everyone. My name is Melinda Morgan, and I am Director of Sustainability Studies here at UNM. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first webinar in a webinar series in the Rio Grande Research Collaborative. So if you're here in Albuquerque, you woke up to a cold and damp morning, and if you're like me, you probably felt a sense of relief associated with that because the wildfires in California and Oregon and Washington are sort of a reminder of our own vulnerability that we have in our own watershed. You know, rising temperatures, bark beetle infestations, prolonged drought, and a number of other factors associated with climate change combine to create wildfire events that are pushing us across ecological thresholds and into new states of being in our watershed and are creating enormous challenges. And so this collaborative is really a hope designed to create a dynamic and ongoing network of researchers that are going to be learning about and understanding what is being done in the watershed to respond to those challenges and to create a collaborative to help inform those responses. And so today, and I think now we can probably go to the next slide if we can. Did we lose the slide? Are we in SlideShare still? I'm not sure. I think we might have lost our slides.
It wasn't letting me advance, so let me try this way.
And while we're doing this, let me thank the co-sponsors of this event, which include the Sustainability Studies Program, which is my program, the Interdisciplinary Science Program, the Interdisciplinary Science Cooperative, the new Mallory Center for Community Geography, which just started here on campus, led by Maria Lane, who's here on the call, with the Resilience Institute, the Center for Water and Environment, led by Carrie Howe, who's also on the call, and the Water Resources Program, and John Fleck, who directs that, is also here on the call. Chris Lippett, who is the the leader, I guess, facilitator of the Science Cooperative, is also on the call. And Chris Lippett and Mark Stone from the Resilience Institute are my co-PIs in this collaborative to date. We're expanding and growing. Thank you to them, and thank you also to Irene Gray, who's kind of helping to pull this whole thing off. She's the program coordinator and really helping with everything, including pulling off this actual logistics of this webinar. So before we do anything further associated with welcome and introductions, Irene, do you want to say anything about the logistics associated with the webinar?
Yeah, so just a few things. The chat is being monitored, so if you have any questions during the presentation, you can shoot questions in the chat. We will leave some time for questions as well, so you don't have to stay muted throughout the whole program. And then if you can, if at all possible, if you can leave your video on. I know for some people that's not always possible, but we'd love to see your faces. And then for Slack, you got the invitation yesterday. It's not mandatory. It's something that we hope becomes kind of an extension of this series and helps keep you all connected and keep sharing ideas and keep that those conversations going. So if you have an opportunity, there's an introduction section within Slack where you can go and introduce each other there. We have a lot of people on the call today, so we can't, as much as we'd love to be able to have everyone introduce themselves today, it might be easiest to do it through Slack. And then we are recording this. The recording will be sent out afterwards along with the slides. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Irene. Thanks for everything you're doing. I see a couple more people still in the waiting room. And also, in lieu of introductions, what I'd like for people to do is maybe what you could do if you're on the call or on the Zoom is go ahead and type your name and your affiliation in the chat. And then also, Irene, did you get a chance to set up that poll that we talked about?
Yeah, let's try it and see if it works. Okay, can you see it?
Okay, so we put in a poll in progress. So if everybody could just sort of fill it in so you can kind of see who's on the line. We had about 55 people register for the Zoom. We got 37 people on the call right now. People are filling it out. And as we have people finish completing the poll, let me just finish this slide and kind of explain what we're doing for the webinar series today, which is a very simple task. In addition to this welcome, we're going to talk a little bit about what the webinar series is going to try and accomplish. And then after that quick pitch of mine to join this webinar series and explain a little bit about what we're going to try and achieve with the collaborative, I'm going to try and leave as much time as possible for questions and answers associated with that. Am I the only person who can see this poll? Or Irene, you can probably see it. Can other people see it? Okay. So.
Did I stop it?
Yeah, I think we've got 33 or 35. So yeah, let's go ahead and stop it. So we've got about 40% faculty, 18% students, 12% agency, 3% NGO, 3% public, and a good chunk of other. So people who are just potentially interested for one reason or another, which is kind of interesting. So I think I heard that it sounds like someone who registered as Elon Musk is on the call. So if he, then all of our funding problems might be over, which could be pretty exciting. So let's stop the poll share. It's a good group we have for our first meeting. Share those results. And move on to the next slide. So let's just talk, let me just tell you a little bit about what we're intending to do with this webinar series. We're going to be meeting, starting with this meeting every 2 weeks over the course of the semester. And the intention with this is to have an opportunity, and actually things go out to both Mary Jo Daniel and to Carrie Howe, who helped me over the summer really think through the best way to start this collaborative. And we decided that having a webinar might be the best way to start it, as a way of getting to know each other as a potential research collaborative. So this is the way we've decided to approach it. What we're going to be doing is meeting over the course of the next 2 weeks. We're going to start with sharing information about the Rio Grande system, the Rio Grande watershed. So 2 people are actually on the call right now. Dagmar Llewellyn from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is going to be providing a talk in the next webinar, providing kind of an overview of the watershed from a resilience perspective. And actually, we're going to have a reading in advance of that hopefully most people will get a chance to look at, that she and I, along with Mark Stone and Ryan Morrison, co-authored, doing a resilience assessment of the Middle Rio Grande watershed. Then after that, Colin Halfley from the Nature Conservancy is going to be talking about the Rio Grande Water Fund, which I'll be mentioning in some more detail here in a moment. So we'll be sharing information over the first couple of sessions to get as many people as possible sort of on board. So that's a short way of saying you don't necessarily have to know a lot about the Rio Grande watershed to want to be a participant in this particular webinar. Some of us are this particular collaborative. Some of us already have done a lot of research related to this watershed and know a lot about it. Others might have a specific type of expertise that we think might be helpful. But for almost all of us, this is our home watershed. And this is where we get our water and it's a great backdoor laboratory for looking at complex social ecological questions. So after we all get kind of a shared sort of basic understanding of some of the potential questions involved, we're going to move into learning together a little bit. So instead of having presentations, instead we're going to just be having some discussions related to a couple of different published papers related to what it means to be a research collaborative. And in particular, we're going to be looking at what it means to do transdisciplinary research. We'll be talking about what that means a little bit in just a moment. And then at the very end, we're going to be doing what we call in my home state of Idaho, fishing or cut and bait. We're going to be talking about who actually wants to join this collaborative and what that means moving forward. So we'll be leaning on Barb Cousins, who's also on this call. She's an interdisciplinary scholar from who just became emerita at the University of Idaho. She's going to be helping us to facilitate that discussion and joining as many of these webinars as possible to help us think through what it means to become a team together. And so that's kind of where we're headed over the course of the series. So hopefully this will give us a chance to get to know each other, to get to know the system of the Rio Grande watershed, and think a little bit about what we might have to offer the ongoing efforts in the watershed to address some of the socio-ecological challenges facing it. And I'm guessing there are probably some questions coming up from that. But please hold them for just a moment so we can get to the next slide because I will hopefully be able to answer them here in just a little bit. So what do I mean when I say a Rio Grande Research Collaborative? What does this potentially mean, and how is it potentially different than what maybe some of you have participated in before in terms of being a part of an interdisciplinary research team? What I'm at this point, this is very much in the nascent stage. So it's a co-creation that very much will be determined by who wants to be a part of it. But these are my thoughts at this stage that I'd like to share with you. Part of it is that it will be ongoing. This is not driven by a particular proposal. Instead, we are driven by really a place, which is our own home watershed and our desire to want to respond to the needs of our own community. So it's been my experience that the best research questions are the ones that really come from that place rather than being driven towards a deadline, towards a particular proposal. So the idea is that we will definitely be generating proposals. But it's going to be an ongoing and dynamic collaborative in the sense that there are going to be people that are going to be coming and going from it. My sense is there will probably end up being kind of a core of people, and then there will be others that will end up saying, you know, let me know if you need this kind of expertise, call me. And then there will be others that will kind of float in, maybe as a student, or because they have a particular interest in a particular type of research that's going on at a particular time. And what we're going to end up with is really a very rich network that's ongoing. It's going to be transdisciplinary. And how is transdisciplinary different than interdisciplinary? Well, that's going to be the topic of 2 of the different webinars that we're going to be having over the course of the semester. But let me tell you 2 things that really characterize transdisciplinary research as opposed to interdisciplinary research. One is it starts with a real world problem as opposed to sort of an academic question. And the fact that our own watershed is facing tremendous ecological challenges and changes from climate change definitely falls into that category. The other, and this is where it gets kind of tricky from where we are standing right now in terms of our own development, is that the research questions and design are actually co-created in place with the communities that you're designing it with. So really what we're doing in this webinar series is kind of figuring out what, as a research community, we might have to offer a community. We're not necessarily developing research questions. We're not necessarily deciding what a research design would be, because that's not really what transdisciplinary research looks like. Instead, we are kind of figuring out what we might have to offer, and then we sort of come together as a team and then have some initial conversations related to maybe partnering with the community in terms of creating research questions and research design. And so the knowledge production looks a lot different than it does in a traditional research design. And I strongly believe that that's really the future of research, for a number of reasons I could go on and on about, but I won't. Next slide. So, so for this next slide, this is my particular pitch, I guess, for the focus for the collaborative at this initial stage. This is the community group, which is in its own, in a sense, its own network or its own collaborative that I think would be an initial potential place of engagement. It's called the Rio Grande Water Fund, and I know that many of you are familiar with it. Some of you are already working within it. The Rio Grande Water Fund is an informal network of over 80 landowners, agencies, water right holders, and others in the Rio Grande watershed that are working to do treatments, biomass removal, and other forms of watershed restoration of over 600,000 acres over the next 20 years. And I haven't talked much, I haven't talked at all about my own expertise, but my expertise is actually in emerging environmental governance trends. So in other words, what's next in terms of how we're going to approach climate change and other types of environmental challenges. And in my opinion, the Rio Grande Fund, which is a non-governmental, informal network of people that have found ways to coordinate and work together, is an example of an emerging governance approach that is worthy of consideration. And it is potentially the subject of a lot of very interesting social and ecological research questions. And there's already a lot of research going on at UNM that informs the work of the Rio Grande Water Fund. So the work that's going on here has been going on since about 2014, and it has increased the amount of biofuel removal and other types of treatments by about 10-fold in the watershed. And the real question, I think, is it happening at the pace and scale that is going to make the difference for water security over time for the downstream communities of Albuquerque, Santa Fe, the agricultural communities, etc. And so, so I know that there are probably a bajillion questions about the Rio Grande Water Fund, and that really is the topic for Colin's talk, which is after Dagmar's talk, which is the third in the webinar series. So I don't want us to get too hung up on focusing down too far into the Rio Grande Water Fund specifically. Instead, what I'd like for us to do is just think more broadly about the fact that our watershed is our own backyard laboratory. And in addition to that, it's also, in a sense, University of New Mexico's opportunity to offer the community its own expertise. So, you know, to the extent to which, you know, we have an ability to make sense to local communities, to connect to local communities, and to ask local communities what they need, this might be one opportunity to engage with an already well-organized and broad-based set of stakeholders to ask those questions. And so that's kind of where we're headed currently in the design of the webinar. And with that really brief overview, we still have lots and lots of time for people to add context, because there are a lot of people on the call with whom, like Dagmar and Colin and Mary Jo and others with whom I've had conversations, who might want to add some more context or ask questions. So let's now move on to questions and answers and see who's on the call. We can move to the gallery view and start having a conversation, which is the fun part. And at this point, just go ahead and I don't know how you want to handle questions, Irene. So are there questions in the chat at this point that people want? I don't see any questions in the chat. So if anyone, does anyone have a question or a comment, just go ahead and unmute yourself and just chime in. Or have I been on mute the whole time?
I wonder, do we need to unmute?
We can't hear Irene.
Oh, I can't hear Irene. Okay, let me unmute. I just unmuted everyone. So,
Oh, there we go.
okay.
That's what I was asking. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
That's what I was asking. I wondered if we had already muted everybody, if we needed.
Dagmar, can you hear? Can you hear Irene now?
Yes.
Okay. Manuel Montoya, you had a question.
Yeah, I was curious if you felt that this collaboration was going to result in the production of a research agenda or specific research for publication, and if so, what was your vision for that?
I will only answer that question if you help me develop a screen share like you have. I think definitely. I mean, the short answer is yes. I absolutely wanted to aim towards a research agenda, towards publications. I wanted to be. Oh, I forgot. One of the things I forgot to mention in one of my slides was, in terms of the collaborative, was in addition to being transdisciplinary, I also want us to research being transdisciplinary. So a part of the publications I want to come out of this is us reflecting upon what it means to be a team trying to do transdisciplinary work. But I think that in the process of coming up with a research agenda, we first need to move slowly, and we'll need to be engaging the community in the development of that agenda. So in the process of targeting, we will bring expertise, I think, to some extent in targeting opportunities for funding and things like that. But but I should also add that many of these community partners are also extremely sophisticated in that regard. So I would expect that many of them will also have lots of ideas. So I think that that it's going to be a little bit of a chicken and an egg associated with how quickly we're able to move towards the development of a research agenda and targets for publication and targets for the development of funding opportunities. Because my sense is that, my hope is that by the time we kind of end this webinar series, we'll have enough of a sense of who we are as a core team that we can begin to have some real engaged conversations with the Rio Grande Fund folks and say, here's what we think we have to offer, and begin conversations related to them, related to research questions that they might want to create with us. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
So, excuse me, this is Dagmar. You'd asked me to speak, so I'm chiming in. As Mindy talked about, I work for an agency, the Bureau of Reclamation here in town. So I'd just like to point out that in my understanding, through this transdisciplinary approach, you know, much as I think the academic community wants to focus on research collaboration towards publication, another focus of this group can also be actionable science, where we have people in the community involved and people in the agencies involved who actually make the management decisions. That can allow for adaptive management kind of research where we try things, but it also can just make the results of the research be actually actionable on the ground so that we can start implementing what we learn in ways that help us to learn even more.
Amen, sister. And in addition to that, you know, Dagmar is developing the basin-wide climate assessment for the Bureau, you know, and so, you know, there's so many things that can be brought to bear in terms of, you know, what she can bring, but also then what we can bring to her. So this is very much a part of that co-creation that I'm talking about, you know, you know, so.
And I'm hoping that, you know, outcomes of this research collaborative can also be included in our basin study report as they're relevant, and that can be sort of publications of different kinds, you know, as well as potentially even inclusion of peer-reviewed publication if it's that relevant, but also other kinds of media, other ways of being involved. And I think that could be really helpful to the basin study process in, you know, in ways that we can incorporate what's being developed by this group into the decision support system for water managers, which is the outcome of that basin study.
Absolutely. Other thoughts?
Mindy, hi, this is Chris Lippett. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, hi, Chris.
Yeah, I apologize. I have a 2-year-old running around, so video would be very nausea-inducing at the moment. So, but I just wanted to ask, I guess, a question, you know, is of how, you know, to me, there could be a lot of research projects start and they end up, you know, they're kind of a monolithic effort where, you know, you're trying to build a team to execute a set of tasks and answer a set of questions, or there's kind of building a shared set of understandings that spins off many independent inquiries. And so I just wanted to kind of ask how you saw that moving forward, and that could help frame kind of some of the rest of the discussion and how people.
That's a great question, Chris. And I'm eager to hear what other people have to say. I vote for track 2 of those 2 options. I mean, I've been joking that jokingly using the COVID sourdough starter metaphor. Everyone I know has a sourdough, is making sourdough right now and has a sourdough starter. Chris, tell me you're making sourdough bread right now.
I can't pull that off anymore. I kill it. I kill it over and over again. I wish.
I killed mine too. But you know, many people are, and I know Dagmar is. And so in a sourdough starter, you end up with this organic living creature, and then it's cooking and it's coming with really great stuff. And then, you know, someone else gets really excited and says, can I have some of that? And maybe you cut a piece off and you give it to maybe me, and then maybe I accidentally kill it, but maybe I don't kill it. Maybe I take care of it and I start making my own sourdough pizza dough. So what I'm saying is different things hopefully will spin off of this. And what I'm hoping is we have this really interesting core of cool ideas that keeps on growing in complexity and depth. And it will spin off things as small as an undergraduate honors thesis and as large as maybe a new NRT proposal for UNM at some point. You know, so, you know, I think that part of what's really required to do truly innovative, you know, deep work across disciplines is taking more than one crack at these types of proposals. And to do that, we have to have a team that really enjoys working together, is willing to continue to work together over time, continuing to learn together and understand each other's work. And to do that, we need to be willing to go beyond one shot at a proposal, one aim at something, and work on a lot of kind of different things, big and small. And so that's why I'm voting for track 2, and not necessarily that everybody's on board with every single thing. You know, it's like Maria Lane, who's on the call, has an expertise in historical geographies. She may end up peeling off a piece of this that has an archival element that I can't even imagine right now, but might be of real value and interest to the collaborative, that then can be fed into a model that Alex is actually building right now that has enormous contemporary interest. You know, so, you know, we have the capacity these days with all this highfalutin technology we have and all this modeling capacity we have to keep, you know, all of the complexity of what we might build as a network in place, ongoing, and tracking it. And that would be my dream, is that we actually have something along those lines.
Hey, Mindy, I want to make a comment. This is Maria Lane. I saw Manuel's follow-up comment in the chat about, you know, the concern about how to balance, you know, careful work with, in collaboration with community versus peer-reviewed publication. And I think that's an important thing to think about as we go forward. One thing I wanted to put out there is that, you know, this, as we saw in the poll, most of this call is faculty who have kind of a kind of constrained circumstances in terms of what ends up being useful or productive for a professional stance. But I think maybe thinking about pedagogy and thinking about classrooms and how we can bring our classrooms into this kind of work, or bring this kind of work into our classrooms, might be even a more useful starting point than thinking about publication in terms of end goals. And I know you're saying, you know, there's a lot of ways this could go, and a lot of you know, that there, it's not meant to be constrained, but I just want to throw that out there from the beginning, that maybe pedagogy is the better starting point for a lot of faculty than thinking about peer-reviewed publication.
I think that's totally valid. That's a great point. I mean, one great thing about doing work, so a couple of things. One great thing about we're doing work on our home watershed is it's relatively cheap. You know, so we can do a lot of it at much lesser cost. We can involve students in classes for much less than flying them halfway around the world, you know, to do similar work. So it's much easier to engage students, and also they're compelled to do it. You know, like when I want to talk to my students about what they're interested in, they want to talk about water, and they want to talk about water here at home. I mean, that's tends to be what my students want to talk about in my natural resource classes. So I think that, so yes to that. We do need a certain amount of money to run this thing at some point. So we will need to be feeding the beast of the model to some extent. So depending on where that funding comes from, you know, we'll see kind of what tracks we end up on. But in general, I love the fact that we're all automatically not necessarily, you know, jumping onto a really traditional model, academic model. What I will say is, I think it's absolutely okay that we're dominated right now by faculty and students, because at this moment, like I said, what we're trying to do and determine is, what do we potentially have to offer, you know, the larger community, and what, you know, and what kind of expertise can we say we can bring to the table, and what are we prepared to do to seek out the funding necessary to meet those needs, you know, as a team. That said, I'm also extremely grateful for people like Dagmar, Todd Kaplan, who's actually an environmental consultant who's done a lot of work with the Pueblo community, public communities here, and is also on the call. So I'm really grateful for people who are outside of academia to give us context and ideas and thoughts. So I don't want, so, but I think it's okay that we're not immediately jumping to the question of what the community's needs are, because we need to be thinking and reflecting on what we have to bring at this stage. More thoughts and questions. This is really fantastic. This is exactly what we need to be doing right now. Thank you, everyone. Question from Beth. Beth, where are you, Beth? Can you unmute yourself?
Physically, where am I?
Yeah, well, that too. Your car, it looks like. That looks interesting.
So I'm up in Massachusetts. I lived in Albuquerque for 5 years, worked at UNM for a little while, worked for a nonprofit, and now I'm doing grad school back in Boston, but would love to return, and a friend linked me into what you guys are doing, so I'm sort of just here learning more and trying to stay involved.
Welcome.
Thanks.
And so your question is about whether BEMP should be included. Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it looks like Dan Shaw's already involved, which is great. But I was just curious from a community collaborative standpoint, if there have already been some specific areas where there's been expressed interest from the Rio Grande Water Fund or any of the stakeholders about how this group could get involved, or where research could fit in, or is that part of this early stage?
Beth, I would say it's definitely part of the early stage, but Colin, are you still on the call? I'm trying to look at my whole gallery view here.
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Colin. Do you want to say just a few things, introduce yourself, and just say a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So, afternoon. I'm Colin Haffey. I work with the Nature Conservancy and work on the Rio Grande Water Fund. I appreciate the group. This is a cool discussion. I think there's, yeah, Beth, to answer your question, let me answer your question really directly. No, we don't have a list of questions, but there are a ton of questions out there, right, that are just always sort of floating around. And so I really liked what Maria had to say about, trying to figure out ways that we can bring the water fund into the classroom and bring the water fund into these kinds of discussions where the people who are actually on the ground doing the work and the people who are learning, through the process of collaboration and through this collective and management and collective action, that they can actually bring some of their thoughts and ideas to the research community through the university setting, whether that's students or professors or anywhere in between. And I think that that's kind of, when I heard this, I think that that's where my head went. We started these conversations, and less of like less of a, and I know that this wouldn't happen with this group, but less of a parachute in sort of science thing, and then bounce out where the folks on the ground are being used as the experiment. And I think that in this case, there's so much cool innovation from how we do projects, how we implement projects, all the way to how we're collaborating and how we're trying to revamp, the governance models to account for hours and hours on Zoom, and just all these different collaborative groups are being spread thin. And so how do you govern how do you do this self-governance in a time where it's the same people in the room at every meeting, and everybody's kind of getting spread out. So yeah, I'm mostly just kind of listening in on this and hoping to find a way to participate, in the future.
I'm curious about drilling in on one of these kind of transdisciplinary tension points as I see it, or maybe like a place of opportunity, which is the sort of how we're drawing the boundaries around the system that we're talking about. So we had the question of, or you've kind of pitched this idea of using the water fund boundaries as it, but then it's already been brought up, that the state uses these planning basins. And I'm curious what people think about, how we deal with the differences of that versus, like an ecological watershed model as a way to do water management, because I feel like we could get a lot out of just seeing the differences between the academic view of things versus some of the water management view of things of people on the call, just based on that difference of what spatial scales we're talking about.
Well, first of all, I have to just laugh in response to Alex's question, because the last time we met, I was talking to Alex about the challenge that she's going to have in her own research of bounding her own research. So this is her throwing that same question back at me, which is pretty funny.
Totally selfishly motivated asking this question.
Let me place a big caveat onto this, which is I think my hope, and I'm sort of proposing the Rio Grande Water Fund as maybe a first volley of a research maybe focus for this collaborative, but maybe not the only research focus for this collaborative. So let me be clear that I don't want to. So I don't want to limit this research collaborative to thinking that if you're not interested in researching this fund, you don't necessarily belong in this collaborative. Because I think that the collaborative itself is potentially much larger and more ongoing than the research questions associated with this collaborative. I just think that based on my knowledge of the watershed and the work that I've been doing within it, that this would be a good first and easy kind of built-in place to start to do transdisciplinary work because of the quality and the level of the stakeholder engagement that's already been built within the fund and the ability to kind of plug in to their model to engage as a place of engagement for developing a community with which we can ask questions. So that's sort of my initial answer as to why we're starting with a fund. But my intention is not necessarily to limit it to the fund itself. And in fact, I think potentially in terms of fundable research questions, there's some very important comparative work that could be done related to the fund, and not necessarily the fund that goes beyond the fund itself. Comparing the fund to other biofuel removal approaches that are being taken in other places in the American West, and also other water funds that are taking place in other countries. We can talk more about that later. But does anyone else want to respond to Alex's question besides myself? And then I want to get to also a comment that Barb Cousins had in the chat. Okay, so that's something we can follow up on again later, Alex. Barb, you had something in the chat. Barb, are you around? Barb Cousins?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Carolyn. You had something. First, would you mind introducing yourself and maybe bringing forward what you wanted to put in the chat, because I didn't get a chance to read it in detail, but I want to make sure you get an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm Barb Cousins. I'm an emerita faculty at the university. I was at the University of Idaho College of Law, and I am here because I worked with Mindy on a major collaborative at a place called SISINC, the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, SISINC. And a lot of what we did was figuring out how to work across disciplines, how to make sure that people's, whatever the metrics you are measured by in the organization you're in, can be satisfied sufficiently so that you can actually commit the time to participate in something like this. So what I put in the chat, I put my email address in it. And what I put in the chat is one of the questions that we'll think about in that last meeting where you're really talking about, I'm going to facilitate your discussion. How do you want to come together as a collaborative? Do you want to? And what's your first step in that? And one of the questions that's really important is, what do you need to get out of this in order to commit the time? You know, just by being on this call, it illustrates you're interested in it and you're interested in the topic and you're interested in working with others and other disciplines. But oftentimes that isn't enough to keep you going for the long term. So that's one of the things we'll ask. And what I asked you to do in the chat is, if you can, between now and December, email me the answer to that. So I'll have some ideas coming into it. And the second thing I wanted to say, some of the questions that you're asking, I'm going to be taking notes through these various sessions, and I'll write them down as things we can come back to at that time, because it may evolve as we go through this. But a question like, what should be the boundaries of the area we're looking at? And therefore that defines who the communities are that you want to be reaching out to, and that type of thing. That can be part of the discussion, and I get from what Mindy was saying that there may be a whole collaborative, but there may be different spin-offs of things that you do, and that can be part of the discussion of the boundaries within which you want to work. So feel free to email me with ideas of things you think we need to cover in that last session, and I'll continue to be listening in, and maybe throughout the webinars throw out questions as they come up that I want you to think about between now and the last session. Thanks, Mindy.
Thank you, Barb. I'm really excited to have you aboard. And I'll just say that I joined Barb's collaborative, which ended up being like a 5-year experience, pre-tenure. And it ended up generating an enormous amount of research and scholarship for me. I was a little anxious about that much investment in what was a really long-term and ongoing, complicated 5-basin collaborative, and it ended up being really extremely worthwhile for me professionally. But these things are definitely intense and take an enormous amount of effort at times, but they're really fun too. So, and it's also worth noting and putting within context, and maybe this is where I see if Carrie Howe is still available, to note that this is a part of the much larger water resources grand challenge, so in sustainable water supply. So this is being sponsored by that initiative. It's one of the co-sponsors, and it's also, you know, within that larger initiative, which is really New Mexico wide. And so did you want to say anything, Carrie, at this point? Are you still on the call by any chance? I don't know if you're still on the call. And Alex, who was just speaking earlier about the scale and what to choose, is one of the research professors who's going to be leading a lot of the a huge modeling effort in relationship to that. So Alex, I don't know if you want to say anything in addition to what your research is going to be related to, but you're working for the initiative on the larger question for the entire state. So
yeah, I'm trying to quantify sustainability and resilience of our water resources for all of New Mexico. So just that.
that little old thing. Okay.
So I'm very interested in things like where to draw the lines and where the data associated is, but I'm also really interested in the transdisciplinary nature of this, so that what I come up with, I get good feedback on and can make it useful.
Great, wonderful, thank you. So glad you're aboard. We have about 5 minutes left. Mark Stone has joined us. He's one of our co-PIs. He had to join us late. Mark, did you want to chime in and say anything?
Just I'm excited about this. You know, these are ideas that have been bouncing around, and I really appreciate that Mindy's taking the leadership here to get a lot of us talking and pointed in the same direction, so that we can try to align a lot of these cool activities that are already underway and do it in an engaging way with a really diverse group on here. It's really wonderful to see. So it's nice to see everyone.
I agree. So it is a wonderful and diverse group, and our first, our next meeting will be really focusing on sort of starting to really understand the watershed as a socio-ecological system. We have put up on the Slack an article called, what's it called? It's called the Middle Rio Grande Resilience Assessment, I think, or a Resilience Assessment of the Middle Rio Grande. And it's written by Mark, myself, Dagmar Llewellyn, and Ryan Morrison, who's also on the call, who got his PhD at UNM and is now a professor at Colorado State. Hopefully it's going to be joining us in this collaborative. And don't be intimidated by the fact that it's a law review article. It's actually one of the products that came out of the collaborative that Barb Cousins led. We were the Middle Rio Grande team, and it's very readable, I think, for something. It was written by one lawyer, two civil engineers, and a hydrologist. But it provides a nice overview of the issues facing the system. It was written in 2014, but it's still, I think, quite relevant today. And that will help you really jumpstart, for those of you who are not familiar with the basin, getting you really into that. You're headed into the game for Dagmar's talk, because she's going to be squeezing what is normally, I think, a longer talk into hopefully 40 minutes, so we can also have time for this type of Q&A. So if you're not, especially if you're not as familiar with the issues in the basin, please take time to familiarize yourself with that work, so that we're as much on as level a playing field as possible going into that discussion in 2 weeks. And I've never used Slack, but it's potentially, I think, a good source of ongoing engagement for us as a research team. And so the more people can fill out their own bios and their own information related to that, their own participation in that, I think the better off we are. And go ahead and feel free to upload. Irene, I think there's room there for people to upload news articles and other related information and publications they think might be of value to the group.
Everything, so it's separated out by the talks, the dates of the talks, so you can add things in for upcoming webinars, or if you just have general information, there's a general channel. And I think you can also talk personally to one another too, so if you want to start conversations within there that way too.
Okay, let's make sure there's like a nice general pot that people can throw things into too, so that people can just throw things in. So please participate in that. We'll see if it works for us as a platform. That would be really helpful. That's something that the Interdisciplinary Cooperative is offering to us as support. That's the kind of thing that they're doing for interdisciplinary teams. And so let's see if we can take it for a drive and see if it works for us as a way of staying connected. Any last thoughts before we close? I guess I'll also say this is ongoing, and the more the merrier. So if you know of people based on this conversation that you think might be a good fit for this, it's never too late to start becoming a part of the conversation at any point within the series. So just contact Irene or myself, or just Google the webinar series itself, and it'll take you to where you can get registered for the Zoom links to become a part of the series. So any parting thoughts before we close?
Thank you, Mindy, for starting this off.
Thank you for your support, Mary Jo, and for the support of the research office in general. It's been great. We're actually going to end on time, which is always a good sign. And I look forward to seeing everybody in 2 weeks, and we'll talk about real stuff for our watershed. I'll see you all then. Take care. Bye.
Bye.